I checked the pressure monitors for the third time during my shift. The familiar glowing numbers on the display hadn't changed in the last 20 minutes, all systems reading normal as they had been since the start of the day. This habitual checking had become as automatic to me as breathing, an operations chief's ritual that kept everyone alive 11,000 feet below the ocean's surface. The command center of Deep Haven hummed with the steady background noise of life support systems and processors. I rolled my shoulders, trying to work out the stiffness that came from hours of sitting at the monitoring station. The facility had been my home for the past 8 months. This metal bubble our fragile protection against the crushing depths outside. August. You might want to see this. I looked up to see Alexis Morgan approaching my station, tablet in hand. Her auburn hair was pulled back in its usual practical style, and excitement brightened her hazel eyes behind her rectangular glasses. The mineral content analysis from yesterday's harvest is promising, she said, sliding the tablet in front of me. We're seeing 30% higher concentration of rare earth elements than projected. The eastern quadrant is particularly rich in neodymium. I scanned the graphs, nodding. This should make Myers happy. Any unusual biological samples? Nothing beyond the usual deep-sea oddities. She tapped the screen, bringing up images of pale, eyeless crustaceans. Though I'm still analyzing some of the sediment composition. There are trace elements I haven't categorized yet. The intercom buzzed before I could respond. Chief, got a minute? Nick Daniels' voice came through, tension evident even through the static. I pressed the response button. Go ahead, Nick. Harvester 3 is acting up again. Power fluctuations, intermittent signal loss. I've got Dominic and Christina running diagnostics, but I think we might need to bring it in for maintenance. I frowned. Harvester 3 was our newest and supposedly most reliable unit. How bad is it? Bad enough that I wouldn't trust it out there another 24 hours. The arm joints are showing stress fatigue well beyond normal parameters. What about the connecting tunnel repairs? Where do we stand on that? I asked, pulling up the facility schematic on my monitor. There was a pause before Nick answered. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about. We're picking up some micro vibrations coming from the harvesters. Nothing critical yet, but the resonance patterns are affecting the weaker sections of the tunnel infrastructure. I made a note to prioritize this issue. The connecting tunnels were our most vulnerable points. Thin metal corridors linking the main habitat modules. If one failed at this depth, the resulting cascade would be catastrophic. Send me the data, and have Sophia put together a reinforcement plan, I said. Will do, Chief. I had barely finished speaking when Josephine Kelly appeared at my side. Her typically neat black hair looked slightly disheveled, and she was clutching her customized headset. August. I just got off a call with Director Myers, she said, lowering her voice slightly, though it wasn't really necessary in the noisy command center. He wants the weekly report today instead of Friday. Apparently, there's a group of investors visiting headquarters tomorrow, and he wants fresh data to show them. I held back a sigh. Did he specify what he wants highlighted? Production metrics, efficiency ratings, and any exciting discoveries were his exact words. Her expression told me exactly what she thought of the rushed request. He also mentioned the board is considering funding an expansion of Deep Haven if this quarter's numbers look good. Of course they are, I muttered. Thanks, Joe. I'll get it to you within the hour. Josephine nodded and returned to her communication station across the room. I turned my attention to my terminal and pulled up the harvester drone data for the past week. The numbers were good, better than good if Alexis's mineral analysis held true across all our collection sites. But something about Nick's report on the micro vibrations troubled me. We couldn't afford structural weaknesses at this depth. I was halfway through compiling the efficiency metrics when I noticed Jackson Williams gesturing urgently from the security monitoring station. "Chief, you need to see this," he called, his normally composed voice carrying an edge I rarely heard. I crossed the command center to where Jackson sat surrounded by external camera feeds. His compact frame was tense, dark eyes fixed on one particular screen. "What am I looking at?" I asked, leaning over his shoulder. "Camera 7, monitoring the eastern collection field. Watch the edge of the light perimeter." I focused on the screen showing murky darkness beyond the reach of our exterior lights. For several seconds I saw nothing unusual, just the occasional marine snow drifting through the beam. Then, movement. A massive shadow glided just beyond clear visibility, momentarily blocking the ambient bioluminescence from deeper waters. "What was that?" I asked, leaning closer. "Can you enhance it?" Jackson tapped controls, adjusting contrast and light sensitivity. "Whatever it is, it's big. Way bigger than anything we've documented at this depth. And it's been circling for about 20 minutes. The shadow passed again, this time closer to the light's edge. I caught a glimpse of something solid and massive, far larger than any fish that should exist at this depth. "How close is it to the harvesters?" I asked, feeling my pulse quicken. "Too close. It's made 3 passes near Harvester 2, but hasn't made contact." Jackson switched to another camera view. "I've never seen movement patterns like this. It's not random, it's methodical, almost like it's examining our equipment." I watched as the shadow made another deliberate pass, this time clearly altering its course to move around our harvester. The behavior was unsettlingly intentional. "Get Alexis down here right now," I said, not taking my eyes off the screen. "She needs to see this." "She's probably in her lab," Jackson replied, already reaching for the intercom. "Then wake her up if you have to." I leaned closer to the monitor, trying to make out any distinguishing features of our visitor. "Tell her we've got something she's going to want to document." As we waited, I watched the massive shape make another circuit of our harvesting equipment. Something about its deliberate movements sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with Deep Haven's carefully regulated temperature. Whatever enormous thing was swimming near our equipment, it didn't belong there, and it seemed far too interested in what we were doing. A deep, instinctive unease settled in my gut. In all my years working deep-sea operations, I'd learned to trust that feeling. Something wasn't right. And as I watched the shadow make another pass at our equipment, I couldn't shake the sense that our peaceful routine at Deep Haven was about to change. The figure on the security feed moved from the darkness into the light from our floodlights. I leaned closer to the screen, gripping the edge of Jackson's console. Alexis arrived at the monitoring station, slightly out of breath. "What am I looking at?" she asked, pushing her glasses up and squinting at the feed. "There," I pointed as the massive shape gradually emerged into the illuminated zone. The creature stepped into our floodlights, and I felt my mouth go dry. Its body was covered in thick, interlocking bony plates that shone, but it was the head that made my skin crawl. Too large, with a blunt, armored skull and bone-crushing jaw plates instead of teeth. "My God," Alexis whispered, her voice a mix of horror and scientific wonder. That can't be." "What is it?" I asked, unable to look away from the screen. "It looks exactly like a Dunkleosteus." She adjusted her glasses again, her hands trembling slightly. "August. That's a fish that went extinct 360 million years ago. Paleozoic era. It shouldn't exist." I straightened up, making a quick decision. "Jackson, alert all external teams." "Nick," I said into my comm, "halt all harvesting operations immediately. Full stop." Nick's voice crackled back, confused. "All of them? Boss, that's going to put us—" "Now, Nick," Emergency protocol. I cut him off, my eyes still fixed on the creature as it circled one of our harvesting units with what seemed like calculated interest. Alexis was already taking screen captures, her initial shock giving way to scientific focus. We need continuous monitoring, multiple angles if possible. Already on it. I nodded to Jackson, who was setting up recording on all external cameras that could capture the creature. I want this thing tracked around the clock. Set up a rotation schedule for monitoring. The next few hours flew by. I shut down external operations and set up a continuous observation protocol. Alexis moved into the monitoring room, turning one of the spare consoles into a field research station. By evening, word had spread throughout Deep Haven about our discovery. I'd managed to keep operations running internally while maintaining a complete cessation of external activities. The main question on everyone's lips: what was our next move? We need to document everything, Alexis said during our quick dinner break, her eyes bright with excitement despite her exhaustion. This creature shouldn't exist. It's like finding a living T-Rex. A T-Rex that's swimming around our multi-billion-dollar underwater facility, I reminded her, keeping my voice low. Throughout the night and into the next day, we maintained our observation shifts. I took the early morning watch, relieving a bleary-eyed Josephine who had been monitoring communications for any similar sightings reported by other deep-sea operations. So far, we appeared to be the only ones with our prehistoric visitor. Alexis joined me around 7, carrying a tablet filled with notes. I've been comparing its morphology with fossil records, she said, pulling up side-by-side images. The armor plating, the jaw structure, it's nearly identical to Dunkleosteus fossils, with some variations that could be explained by adaptation or our incomplete fossil record. What about its behavior? I asked, watching as the creature made another pass near Harvester 1. That's where it gets interesting. She swiped to a different screen. I've been timing its movements. It's not random. It's systematic, almost like it's patrolling or examining our equipment. I frowned, noticing something on the feed. Look there. When Harvester 4 ran its automated maintenance cycle an hour ago, the lights and minor mechanical adjustments, our friend changed course immediately and headed straight for it. Alexis nodded, making notes. It's showing a clear attraction to vibration and activity. Classic predator behavior, actually. Drawn to signs of potential prey. Except we're not its natural prey, I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. No, she agreed. But after 360 million years, who knows what it considers prey now? By mid-afternoon, I decided it was time to brief the full crew. I called a meeting in the main conference room, where I could fit everyone not currently on essential duty. 20 faces looked back at me, expressions ranging from excitement to poorly concealed fear. As most of you have heard by now, I began, standing at the front of the room with Alexis beside me. We've discovered something unprecedented outside our facility. Dr. Morgan will explain what we're dealing with. Alexis stepped forward and displayed images on the main screen. This looks like a living Dunkleosteus torelli, a prehistoric armored fish that was the top predator during the late Devonian period, about 360 million years ago. She clicked through several images of fossil reconstructions alongside our footage. These creatures grew up to 8 or 9 meters long and had one of the strongest bite forces of any fish. Instead of teeth, they had sharp bony plates that formed a cutting edge, like self-sharpening scissors that could slice through almost anything. A low murmur went through the room. I watched the crew's reactions carefully. Cole, our physician, was leaning forward with fascination. Sophia, our maintenance supervisor, was chewing her lip nervously. Dominic and Christina, our technicians, were whispering to each other, pointing at details in the images. How is this possible? Cole asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. Could it be some kind of modern relative that just resembles the fossil record? Possible, but unlikely, Alexis replied. The similarities are too exact. We're calling it a Lazarus taxon, a species that disappears from the fossil record but is later found alive, like the coelacanth, but on a much more dramatic timescale. What does it want? Christina asked, her voice small. Alexis looked to me, and I stepped forward again. We don't know, but we've noticed it shows particular interest in our equipment, especially when active. That's why I've temporarily halted all external operations. For how long? Nick asked from the back of the room, arms crossed. We have quotas, August. Myers is already on my back about the maintenance delays with Harvester 3. Safety comes first, I said firmly. Once we better understand this creature's behavior patterns, we can assess when to resume limited external operations. What about our equipment? Nick pressed. Those harvesters cost millions each. If that thing decides to get curious about what they taste like, we'll maintain safe distances, I assured him, though the same concern had been nagging at me. For now, our priority is observation and documentation. We're the first humans to ever see this creature alive. Let's not do anything hasty. The meeting continued with questions about safety protocols and reporting procedures. I outlined clear guidelines. No external activities without explicit authorization, constant monitoring of the creature's location, and immediate reporting of any unusual behavior. After the briefing, I spoke privately with Nick, Jackson, and Josephine about security measures and communication protocols. If things went sideways, we needed to be prepared. That night, despite my exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in my quarters for an hour before giving up and heading back to the command center. The night shift, Christina and Carl looked surprised to see me. Anything new? I asked, pouring myself coffee from the station pot. It's been circling the western quadrant for the last 2 hours, Christina reported. Moving in this weird pattern, like a figure 8 around harvesters 2 and 4. I nodded, taking a seat at an empty console and pulling up the recorded footage from the day. For the next several hours, I reviewed the Dunkleosteus's movements, creating a map of its patterns. The more I watched, the more my unease grew. This wasn't random behavior. The creature had systematically investigated every piece of our external equipment, every connection point, every pipeline. It had studied our access hatches, our external sensors, our reinforced tethers to the surface. I pulled up the structural schematics of Deep Haven, comparing them with the creature's movement patterns. It was as if it was creating a map of our vulnerabilities, the thinner-walled sections, the junction points, the umbilical connections to our supply lines. Around 4 in the morning, I started drafting contingency plans. First, a protocol for quickly bringing in any personnel who might be caught outside during an aggressive approach. Next, emergency procedures for reinforcing vulnerable sections if the creature showed any hostile intent. Finally, worst-case scenarios, power conservation, critical systems protection, and even partial evacuation procedures using our limited emergency submersibles. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being prepared. 11,000 feet underwater, we couldn't afford to be caught off guard. The way this ancient predator examined our facility showed a level of intelligence that made me uncomfortable. The Dunkleosteus didn't just happen to find us. It was studying us. I was reviewing the overnight observation logs when Christina Hoffman's voice came through on the intercom, tense and controlled. "Sir, I'm picking up unusual sounds near Harvester 2. It's like scraping metal. Very distinctive." I set down my coffee mug and tapped the command for the external feeds. "What section are you monitoring from?" Engineering Bay 3. I heard it through the hull sensors first, then checked the equipment readouts. The harvester's showing stress patterns I've never seen before. I brought up Camera 8, which had the best view of Harvester 2. The feed stabilized, showing the Dunkleosteus circling the harvester, its massive body moving slowly through the murky water. Christina, alert Nick and tell him to join me in the command center immediately. Yes, sir. The creature made another pass around the harvester, closer this time. Something about its movement had changed since yesterday. Gone was the curious investigation. This looked purposeful, predatory. I leaned forward, adjusting the camera to follow the Dunkleosteus as it circled our equipment. The floodlights reflected off its bony plates. Then it stopped in front of the harvester's main collection arm and opened its jaw. Instead of teeth, massive bone plates slid against each other with horrifying precision. They formed a cutting edge that looked impossibly sharp for something so ancient. For a split second, I couldn't process what I was seeing. Then the Dunkleosteus lunged forward. The reinforced metal arm, built to withstand extreme pressure and designed to slice through bedrock, snapped between those bone plates like it was made of plastic. The severed section tumbled through the water as sparks and hydraulic fluid created a cloud around the attack site. My God, I whispered, pressing the alert button. The klaxon sounded throughout Deep Haven as I grabbed the comm system. This is Operations Chief Garrison. All personnel report to emergency stations immediately. All external operations are suspended. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. I watched as the creature circled back, seemingly drawn to the sparking electronics at the severed end of the harvester arm. It approached again, those bone plates working against each other like some kind of prehistoric grinding mechanism. The command center door slid open as Nick rushed in, followed closely by Cole and Josephine. What's happening? Nick asked, already moving to his station. Our prehistoric friend just bit through Harvester 2's main arm, and now it was tearing at the rest of the harvester. Cole moved closer to the monitor, his face pale. That's impossible. The tensile strength of those components. I know what I saw. I interrupted. Those bone plates are unlike anything I've seen. The pressure they can generate is huge. Cole turned to me, his medical training making him think of the most immediate danger. Can it breach our hull? I looked to Nick, who was already running calculations on his console. Nick, I need to know what kind of structural threat we're looking at. If that thing decides to turn its attention to us. Already on it, Nick said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. I'm running stress simulations based on what we just saw. Jackson joined us, his expression grim as he took in the situation displayed on the monitors. More crew members filed in, taking their emergency stations with practiced efficiency. Alexis is securing the lab, Josephine reported from her communications console. Everyone else is accounted for and at their stations. Nick looked up from his console, his face serious. From what I saw, and the force needed to sever that arm, the main habitat modules should hold up. They're triple-hulled and built to withstand extreme pressure. I felt a momentary flash of relief until Nick continued. But the tunnels between sections, they have thinner walls to allow for flexibility. If that thing bites down there, he shook his head. I can't guarantee they'd hold. The image of our facility's layout flashed through my mind. Our living quarters, the command center, research labs, and engineering sections were all connected by those tunnels. If even one was compromised at this depth. We need to alert surface control, I said, making a quick decision. And prepare evacuation procedures, just in case. Josephine, establish contact with the platform. Tell them we have a Class 1 emergency, and need immediate consultation on extraction options. Josephine nodded and turned to her communications array. I watched the back of her head, her shoulders tense as she worked the equipment with practiced hands. The Dunkleosteus tore through Harvester 2 on the monitor, targeting the machine's weak spots with precision. It wasn't attacking randomly. It was clearly identifying where to strike. "Sir?" Josephine's voice pulled my attention away from the screen. "I can't establish contact with the relay buoy." "Try the backup channels," I instructed, moving to her station. I did. All channels. The buoy's not responding at all. Her fingers continued working the controls, but her expression told me everything I needed to know. "When was our last successful transmission?" I asked. 4 hours ago. Routine status update." I looked back at the screen showing the Dunkleosteus. Had it already found our communications relay? The timing seemed too coincidental. "Jackson," I said, turning to our security chief. "What kind of defensive options do we have if that thing decides we're next on the menu?" Jackson's expression tightened. "Not much designed for something like this. Let me check the inventory." He moved to the security station and accessed the weapons locker manifest. After a moment, he looked up with a grim expression. "2 high-powered spear guns, sir. Some underwater flares. The facility wasn't exactly designed with sea monster defense in mind. 2 spear guns against a creature that could bite through reinforced mining equipment." I looked around the command center at my crew, all professionals waiting for my orders. Beyond the viewport, 11,000 feet of ocean pressed down on us, and somewhere out there, an armored predator thought to be extinct for millions of years was destroying our equipment with precision. No way to call for help. Minimal defenses. And the only thing between us and that creature was a series of metal walls it had already proven it could bite through. We were trapped at the bottom of the ocean, with a prehistoric monster that could tear through metal, and nobody on the surface knew we were in danger. I called the senior staff to the conference room next to the command center. Nick, Alexis, Josephine, Jackson, and Cole entered, their faces serious. I had spent the last hour reviewing our situation, and none of the conclusions were encouraging. "Take a seat," I said, gesturing to the chairs around the table. "We need to assess exactly where we stand." Nick dropped into the chair to my right, rubbing his eyes. He hadn't slept since the attack on Harvester 2. Alexis sat across from me, her tablet already open to notes about the creature. Josephine took the seat beside her, while Jackson remained standing near the door, arms crossed. Cole sat at the far end, medical tablet in hand. "Let's be clear about our situation," I said, laying my hands flat on the table. "We've lost contact with the surface. We have a prehistoric predator outside that can tear through reinforced metal, and we're sitting in a pressurized habitat 11,000 feet underwater." "Can we try to get the relay buoy back online?" Josephine asked. "Not without external access," Nick replied before I could answer. "And I'm not sending anyone out there with that thing circling us." I nodded in agreement. "Our priority has to be maintaining hull integrity and preserving life support systems. We have supplies for 3 months under normal conditions." "What about offensive options?" Jackson asked. "Those spear guns won't do much, but if we could modify them..." "No," I cut him off. "This isn't about fighting the creature. It's about surviving until we can re-establish contact with the surface." The meeting continued for another hour as we assessed each system and potential vulnerability. By the time we adjourned, we had a clear picture of our dire circumstances, but also the beginnings of a survival plan. Over the next 2 days, I stayed in the command center. I watched our cameras as the Dunkleosteus destroyed our harvesting equipment. First, Harvester 4 went down, its collection arm severed like Harvester 2's. 6 hours later, the creature returned for Harvester 1, attacking the power junction. It seemed to learn with each attack, becoming more precise in targeting weak spots. "It's taking them apart like it knows exactly where to hit," I muttered to Nick, who stood beside me at the main console. "This is the last one," Nick said as we watched the creature circle Harvester 3 on the monitor. "After this, we've got nothing left out there except the facility." The Harvester's lights flickered as the Dunkleosteus made its first pass, bumping the frame hard enough to tilt it. On the second pass, it bit through the hydraulic lines, causing a cloud of fluid to bloom in the water. Within 20 minutes, Harvester 3 was as dead as the others. "We need to try something," Nick said suddenly. "We still have the maintenance arms on the eastern hub. They're designed for external repairs. We could try to drive it away." I considered this for a moment. "Do it. But don't damage the arms if you can help it. We might need them later." Nick nodded and moved to another console. I watched as he activated the maintenance system, extending 2 robotic arms from a sealed port on the east side of the facility. The manipulators moved through the water, each ending in a pincer tool for repair work. Nick guided them toward the Dunkleosteus, which was still circling the ruined Harvester. The creature seemed to notice the movement immediately, turning to face the new intrusion. Nick maneuvered one arm to poke at the creature's side, attempting to drive it away. What happened next made my stomach drop. The Dunkleosteus turned with surprising speed and lunged at the robotic arm. Its bone-plated head easily deflected the metal appendage, and then in one decisive bite, it severed the arm completely. The second arm suffered the same fate moments later. Nick swore under his breath. So much for that idea. Alexis, who had been quietly observing from a nearby station, pointed to something on the screen. "Did you see that?" It knew exactly where to bite to disable the arms completely. "What are you saying?" I asked, turning to her. "I'm saying it's learning," she replied, tapping keys to replay the footage. "Look here. It's not attacking randomly. It's specifically targeting joints, power conduits, and control interfaces." I leaned closer to study the replayed attack. She was right. The creature didn't waste energy on the reinforced sections. It went straight for the vulnerable components. "It's not just attacking our equipment," I realized aloud. "It's targeting our connections to the surface. First the harvesters, then the relay buoy, now the external maintenance systems." "It's isolating us," Alexis said softly. The implications hit me hard. We weren't facing random attacks. This was a calculated effort to take away our resources. "Everyone listen up," I announced, straightening. "We need to minimize our profile. Nick, power down all non-essential systems. Anything that creates vibration or electrical signatures outside the hull needs to be shut off." "That's most of our external sensors," Nick pointed out. "Keep the minimum needed for basic monitoring. Everything else goes dark." I turned to Jackson. "I want teams assigned to reinforce every critical junction in the facility. Focus on the connecting tunnels between modules. Nick says they're the most vulnerable." Jackson nodded. "I'll get Sophia and her maintenance crew on it right away. Josephine, I need a complete inventory of emergency supplies. Food, water purification, medical, everything. And Cole," I turned to our physician, "prepare the medical bay for potential pressure injuries. If we get a breach, we need to be ready for decompression issues." Everyone moved with purpose, their focused expressions showing the seriousness of our situation. As the command center emptied, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. Later that evening, I found Nick alone in the engineering hub, reviewing structural schematics. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of his console and the emergency lighting we'd switched to. in order to conserve power. "How are the reinforcements coming along?" I asked, approaching him. "We've strengthened the main connecting tunnels. Sophia's team is working on the residential module junctions now." He looked up from his work, shadows under his eyes. "But if that thing really wants in, August, I'm not sure how long we can keep it out." I nodded grimly, then asked the question that had been bothering me since our first emergency meeting. "What about the submersibles? Are they still operational?" Nick's expression tightened. He glanced toward the door to make sure we were alone before answering. "They're operational, but there's a problem." He brought up the specs on his screen. "They were designed for limited emergency use, inspection, minor repairs, small team evacuation. Each one can only carry 4 people safely." "And we have 2, I said, doing the quick math in my head. "So 8 people total." "That's right." Nick's voice was low. 8 people, out of 19 crew members. The information hit me like a physical blow. Even if we could use the submersibles to evacuate, we'd have to leave more than half our people behind. "Have you told anyone else about this?" I asked. Nick shook his head. "Just you. I figured you should decide who needs to know." I stared at the submersible schematics, weighing our options. Sharing this information now would only spread panic through the crew when we needed everyone calm and focused. "Keep this between us for now," I decided. "If it comes to evacuation, we'll cross that bridge then. Right now, our priority is making sure it doesn't come to that." Nick nodded in understanding, and I left him to his work. That night, I returned to my quarters but couldn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bunk, reviewing the day's events in my mind. We'd done everything we could to prepare, but would it be enough? I was about to try again to get some rest when I felt a vibration through the floor. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but when I placed my palm flat against the metal, I felt it clearly. A rhythmic tremor pulsed through the structure of Deep Haven. Something had changed. The creature wasn't just circling anymore or making random attacks. The vibration pattern felt deliberate, methodical, like it was testing the facility, looking for weaknesses. I got to my feet, suddenly alert, sensing that our situation had just become even more precarious. I woke up disoriented, the piercing wail of emergency alarms yanking me from sleep. My eyes snapped open to the red warning lights pulsing across my quarters. For a second, my brain struggled to catch up with my racing heart. "Attention all personnel. Emergency protocol activated. This is not a drill." I rolled out of bed, already reaching for my boots. Sleep evaporated instantly as training kicked in. I pulled my uniform on, not bothering with the proper fastenings, and rushed into the corridor. Other crew members emerged from their quarters, faces tight with worry as they moved toward their emergency stations. The alarms continued their relentless howl as I made my way to the command center, my boots pounding against the metal floor. The corridors felt narrower than usual, the ceiling lower. I pushed past 2 technicians discussing something in hurried whispers and burst through the command center doors. "Report," I called out, making my way to the central console. Josephine turned from her communications station, her face pale under the emergency lights. "We've lost all contact with the surface, Chief. Complete blackout. No data transfer, no voice comms, nothing. The relay buoy isn't responding to any signals." "How long?" I asked, scanning the status screens. 17 minutes. Systems went down suddenly. No degradation warning. Jackson waved me over to his security station. "You need to see this, sir." On his monitor was footage time-stamped from earlier, about 20 minutes ago, according to the display. The external camera showed our communication array anchored to the seafloor about 50 yards from the main habitat. The array's lights blinked steadily in the darkness until a massive shadow moved into frame. "Is that—" I started. "The Dunkleosteus," Jackson finished for me. "Watch." The creature circled the array once, twice, its armored body reflecting the light in dull gleams. Then, with startling precision, it turned and slammed directly into the base of the array. The structure wobbled, but held. The Dunkleosteus backed away, circled once more, then charged again, this time with its mouth open. Those bone plates closed around a junction box with cables running to the surface. The creature twisted its massive body, and the cables snapped. The array went dark. "It went for the power junction first," Jackson said, his voice low. "Then the data cables, then the backup systems. One by one." "Play it again," I said, leaning closer. The footage confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't random destruction. The creature had targeted our communication systematically, disabling each component in an order that prevented automatic failovers from activating. "It knew exactly what it was doing," I said, straightening up. "It cut us off." Nick approached from his engineering station. "We could attempt repairs," he suggested, though his expression told me he already knew the problems with his own idea. "The backup array components are stored in external Bay 2. We'd need to send people out to reconnect everything." "In diving suits?" I asked. "With that thing actively hunting us?" Nick nodded grimly. "That's the only way." I looked around the command center at the faces of my crew, all professionals, all trained for emergencies, but none of us had trained for this. A prehistoric predator with apparent intelligence, cutting us off from the world 11,000 feet above us. Not happening, I decided. We're not sacrificing anyone on a repair mission that's doomed from the start. I turned to Josephine. "Call a facility-wide meeting in the main mess hall. Everyone needs to hear this directly from me." 30 minutes later, I stood before the assembled crew of Deep Haven. 62 faces looked back at me, some frightened, others determined, all waiting for me to tell them what happened and what we would do next. The mess hall felt too small for this many people, the recycled air growing warmer by the minute. "By now, you've all heard that we've lost contact with the surface," I said. "What you might not know is that it wasn't an accident or equipment failure. The creature we've been observing destroyed our communications array on purpose." Murmurs spread through the crowd. I raised a hand for silence. "I know how this sounds. I've reviewed the footage. The Dunkleosteus targeted our equipment with clear intent." I paused. "We are now completely isolated. No communications up, no communications down." "What about the emergency protocols?" Someone called from the back. "The surface station should send help if we miss scheduled check-ins." "Yes," I acknowledged. "Standard protocol means they'll investigate after 48 hours of missed communications. But even then, they'll need to identify the problem and develop a rescue plan. That could take days, maybe weeks." I let my gaze move across the room, making eye contact with as many people as I could. "Here's what we know for certain. We have life support systems rated for 6 months at full capacity. We have food supplies for 3 months at standard rations. Water recycling is functioning at optimal levels. Our power core is stable." The tension in the room eased slightly, but not much. "We're in a serious situation, but we're ready for isolation. Deep Haven was built to be self-sufficient. Our goal is to keep this facility intact while we wait for rescue." I outlined the adjustments we'd be making: power conservation measures, supply rationing, security protocols, and a buddy system for all movements throughout the facility. No one would work alone, no matter how routine the task. I answered questions for almost an hour, being honest about the challenges without feeding the fear I could see in many eyes. When the meeting broke up, people moved with purpose rather than panic. That was something, at least. I returned to the command center to check the external camera feeds. The Dunkley Osteus wasn't visible, but that didn't mean it wasn't out there, watching, waiting. "Chief?" I turned to find Alexis standing nearby, her tablet clutched against her chest. "Walk with me," I suggested, not wanting to discuss anything sensitive where others might overhear. We made our way to the small observation lounge off the main corridor. Through the thick viewport, the ocean was a wall of darkness, broken only by our external lights. We stood side by side, looking out. "I have a theory," Alexis said after a moment, "about why the Dunkley Osteus is targeting us specifically." I waited, watching her reflection in the glass. "I think we're in its territory, not just near it, directly in it." She tapped her tablet, bringing up a map of our mining operations. "Look at the pattern of its movements when we first observed it. It was circling this area." She pointed to a section on the map. "We assumed it was drawn to our equipment out of curiosity, but you think otherwise." She nodded. "Deep-sea territorial boundaries are often defined by pressure gradients, temperature variations, or geographical features. Our mining operation has disturbed the seafloor sediment significantly, potentially altering all three." "You're saying we moved in and started tearing up its living room," I summarized. "More like we built our house on top of its den," Alexis corrected. "And our harvesting operations are the equivalent of running a jackhammer at all hours." I considered this. Could understanding this creature better help us survive this situation? Alexis tilted her head slightly, a gesture I'd come to recognize as her weighing scientific caution against practical needs. "Possibly. If we can predict its behavior or identify weaknesses, we might be able to deter it or at least avoid provoking further aggression." "Get on it," I told her. "Use whatever resources you need, but stay safe." She nodded and left me alone with the blackness beyond the viewport. I spent the afternoon coordinating with department heads, establishing new security protocols, and reviewing our supplies. Everyone had their role, their tasks. Keeping busy helped keep the fear at bay. I was reviewing structural integrity reports with Nick when the lights flickered. We both looked up as the overhead illumination dimmed, brightened, then dimmed again. "Power fluctuation," Nick said, already moving to his console. "Secondary systems just kicked in." The command center displays showed a troubling pattern, power levels dropping in sections of the facility, then stabilizing, then dropping again. "What's causing it?" I asked, joining him at the engineering display. "External power conduit is showing damage," Nick replied, fingers flying across the controls. "Something's interfering with the main junction from the generators." I didn't need to ask what that something might be. Over the next hour, systems throughout Deep Haven stuttered. Life support, temperature regulation, water filtration. Nothing failed completely, but the constant interruptions felt like a cough from a patient you couldn't afford to lose. Standing in the command center, I watched warning indicators flash across the screens. The walls, made to withstand the ocean's pressure, felt thin. The space between us and the black water outside, between life and death, was just inches of engineered material that could be breached. I placed my palm against the metal wall, feeling the vibration of the life support systems. For the first time since we discovered the Dunkley Osteus, the reality of our situation hit me hard. We weren't just observers in the deep anymore. We weren't even hunters or miners. We were prey. I was leaning over a set of structural schematics with Nick in the engineering bay when the lights went out. The darkness hit suddenly, leaving us in pitch black for a few seconds before the emergency backup kicked in. with a dull red glow. "That's Section 3, Nick said, his face barely visible in the crimson light. "Main power circuit must have blown." "Or been damaged," I replied. We'd been discussing reinforcement options for the weaker sections of the habitat for the past hour, marking up blueprints with potential bracing points. "Let's get to the command center." Before we could move, my comm unit crackled. "Operations, this is McGuire." Sophia's voice was tight, controlled, but I caught the undercurrent of urgency. "Go ahead, Sophia." "We've got flooding in the lower access corridor. Water's coming in fast through a hairline fracture. My team's trying to contain it, but we need help." Nick and I exchanged glances. "On our way," I said, already moving. We sprinted through the dimly lit corridors toward the lower section. The emergency lights cast everything in a blood-red glow that made the narrow passageways feel even more confined. When we reached the access corridor, Sophia and two of her team were already sealing the outer hatch. Water pooled around their feet, reflecting the emergency lighting. "Status?" I asked, splashing through the inch-deep water. Sophia's hair was plastered to her forehead, her maintenance jumpsuit soaked. Fracture extended along the pressure seam. We caught it before catastrophic failure, but she gestured to the bulkhead where water still seeped through despite their patch job. I grabbed a nearby sealing compound and joined her team. For the next 20 minutes, we worked in tense silence, applying layer after layer of industrial sealant to the compromised section. The water level stopped rising, but Sophia's expression remained grim. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly as we finished. "We're losing structural integrity faster than we can reinforce it. That thing outside is testing every weak point." I nodded, knowing she was right. "How many sections can you seal off if needed?" 4, maybe 5, before we start compromising life support pathways. I keyed my comm unit. "Attention all personnel. This is Operations Chief Garrison. We're implementing emergency protocols. All sections are to operate on auxiliary power only. Emergency lighting is now active throughout the facility." The situation called for decisive action. "I want all essential supplies moved to the command center immediately. Medical, food, water, emergency gear, everything we can't afford to lose. Priority Alpha." Sophia wiped water from her face. "I'll coordinate with Ellie to shore up the East Junction." "Good. Have Carl reinforce the connecting tunnels between habitation and command. Use whatever materials we've got." As Sophia hurried off, I turned to Nick. "Let's get back to command. We need to review our options with the senior staff." The corridors seemed longer on the way back, the red emergency lighting casting strange shadows. Crew members passed us carrying supply crates, moving with purpose, but unable to hide their fear. I nodded reassuringly to each one, trying to project a confidence I wasn't entirely feeling. In the command center, I found Alexis, Josephine, Jackson, and Cole already waiting. Their faces were tense in the dim light. "The situation's deteriorating," I began without preamble. "Sophia reports multiple stress fractures developing. We're sealing what we can, but our options are limited." Nick pulled up the facility schematics on the main screen. "The connecting tunnels between modules are our biggest vulnerability. Carl and Ellie are working on reinforcements, but there's only so much we can do." "What about evacuation?" Josephine asked. "The submersibles can only take 8 people total," I reminded her. "And with that thing out there, launching would be extremely risky." A low, grinding noise interrupted us. Metal against metal, but oddly organic. Everyone fell silent. "It's back," Jackson said quietly. I moved to the viewport, the only window to the outside world in the command center. Through the thick glass, I could see it. The Dunkleosteus, massive and primeval, circling closer than ever before. Its armored body scraped against our outer hull as it passed, creating that horrible noise that seemed to travel through the very bones of our structure. "It's been getting more aggressive," Alexis said, coming to stand beside me. "The pattern has changed. It's not just making passes anymore. It's constantly circling." I watched as its ancient form moved through the floodlights. The thick interlocking plates of its exoskeleton gleamed dully. When it turned, I caught a glimpse of its eye. Cold, black, impossibly old. "I want hourly structural integrity checks," I said, turning back to the team. "Every section, every junction. We need to know the second anything starts to give." Cole stepped forward. "What about injuries, if we have a breach?" "Prepare for the worst," I told him. "Get everything ready in the command center. Decompression treatments, trauma kits, anything we might need." The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and reinforcement work. I moved between sections, checking on progress, reassuring crew members, and helping where I could. Carl and Ellie worked tirelessly on the connecting tunnels, applying makeshift bracing and reinforcement panels. "This should hold against normal pressure changes," Carl explained, tightening a brace. "But if that thing hits us with force..." "Do what you can," I said. "And when you're done, I want both of you in the command center." As the ship's night cycle began, I ordered most of the crew to rest in shifts. No point in everyone being exhausted, I told them, though I knew sleep would be difficult with that creature circling outside. While the others tried to rest on makeshift beds in the command center, I stayed at the main console with Nick, poring over the facility schematics for the 100th time. "There has to be something we're missing," I said, rubbing my tired eyes. "Some way to drive it off or protect ourselves better." Nick looked as exhausted as I felt. The outer hull was designed to withstand pressure and normal ocean conditions, not attacks from prehistoric monsters. I leaned back, stretching muscles that had grown stiff from hours of tension. "Everything has a weakness," I said, almost to myself. "Even prehistoric monsters." Through the viewport, I could still see the creature making its relentless circuit of our habitat. Its armored body seemed impenetrable, its jaw powerful enough to shear through reinforced metal. And yet, "We just need to figure out what its vulnerability is," I said, turning back to the schematics, "before it finds ours." I organized the crew into emergency teams as the situation got worse. After spending half the night watching the Dunkleosteus circle our habitat, I knew we needed a more structured approach to survive. The creature's systematic testing of our facility made one thing clear. We weren't dealing with mindless aggression, but something far more concerning. "I need everyone's attention," I said, standing at the front of the command center where I'd gathered the senior staff. "We're establishing formal emergency response teams, effective immediately." The tired faces looking back at me showed a mix of fear and determination. I could see the toll the last few days had taken on them. Dark circles under eyes, unwashed hair, shoulders tight with tension. "Nick, you'll lead the engineering team. Your priority is maintaining hull integrity at all points. Take whoever you need." Nick nodded, his expression serious. "I'll start with reinforcing the junction between modules. That's our weakest point." "Good. Alexis and Cole, I need you to prepare a medical response team. If we have a breach, we'll need to treat decompression sickness and other injuries quickly." I looked directly at Cole. "Set up multiple treatment stations throughout the facility. We can't count on everyone making it to the medical bay." Cole pulled out his tablet. "I'll inventory our supplies and distribute them strategically." "Jackson, You'll handle security and resource management, ration food, water, and emergency oxygen. Make sure everyone has access to survival gear within 20 seconds of their station." Jackson crossed his arms. "Already mapping access points. I'll have a distribution plan ready in 2 hours." I looked around the room. Questions. When no one spoke, I continued. "Communicate these assignments to your teams and report back by this afternoon with implementation status." Dismissed. As they filed out, I caught the sideways glances, the whispered words between colleagues. The crew's spirits were sinking. I'd seen it before on deep-sea operations when things went wrong. How quickly confidence could erode, replaced by a creeping dread that spread like a virus. Over the next several hours, I visited each team as they worked. In Engineering Bay 2, Nick and his crew were reinforcing support beams with carbon fiber strapping. "How's it coming?" I asked, inspecting their work. Nick wiped sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. "We're making progress. Another 4 hours and we'll have the main junction secured." I nodded, making eye contact with each team member. "The work you're doing right now might save all our lives. I know it's not what you signed up for, but I couldn't ask for a better team handling this." A few small smiles broke through their tired expressions. I moved on to the supply depot where Jackson was organizing emergency kits. Each pack has 3 days of rations, water purification tablets, and a backup oxygen supply, he explained, showing me the contents. "Smart planning," I said loud enough for his team to hear. "But let's be clear about our situation. We're not giving up on maintaining this facility. These packs are our last resort, not our first line of defense." I made similar rounds to every station, offering honest assessments mixed with genuine confidence in their abilities. Not false hope. They deserved better than empty promises, but a reminder that we still had options, resources, and most importantly, each other. Later that afternoon, Alexis asked to speak with me privately. We walked to the small observation blister on the east side of the command module, where a reinforced viewpoint allowed a limited view of the surrounding water. "I've been tracking the Dunkley Osteus's movements," she said, showing me her tablet with a chart displaying activity patterns. "There's a clear correlation between our operational tempo and its aggressive behavior." I studied the data. "What am I looking at exactly?" "These spikes represent attacks or aggressive approaches," she explained, pointing to the graph. "Notice how they align almost perfectly with our peak operational hours, when the harvesters were running, when we were moving equipment, or when maintenance systems were active." "You think it's responding to our activity levels?" She nodded. "More specifically, I think it's responding to vibrations. These ancient predators likely used vibrations in the water to locate prey. Our machinery creates specific frequency patterns that might be driving it into a hunting frenzy." I stared out at the dark water, processing this information. "So our normal operations are basically ringing the dinner bell." "It's a working theory," Alexis said, "but it would explain the targeted attacks on our equipment." A thought occurred to me. If vibrations are triggering its hunting response, what happens if we go completely quiet? "We might see a reduction in aggressive behavior," she said, "but I can't guarantee it." "It's worth testing," I decided. "We need every advantage we can get." I returned to the command center and called the senior staff together once more. "We're implementing operational shutdowns every 6 hours, I announced. "Complete power down of all non-essential systems for 2-hour stretches. Life support remains active, but everything else goes dark. No movement, no machinery, minimal electronic signatures." "What about structural integrity monitoring?" Nick asked. "Manual checks only during shutdown periods. Alexis has a theory that our operational vibrations might be agitating the creature. We're going to test it." The first shutdown came at 1800 hours. We powered down everything but critical life support systems and emergency lighting. The facility grew unusually quiet. No hum of machinery, no whir of air circulation systems, just the occasional creak of metal adjusting to pressure changes. I watched the external camera feeds, the infrared tracking system still operational, but in passive mode. For the first 40 minutes, the Dunkley Osteus continued its regular patrol pattern. Then, gradually, its movements slowed. By the 90-minute mark, it had drifted farther from our facility than we'd seen in days. "It's working," Alexis whispered beside me in the dim light of the command center. "Let's not celebrate yet," I cautioned, but I felt a small flutter of hope in my chest. We maintained this pattern through 3 complete cycles, 6 hours operational, 2 hours shut down. Each time, the creature seemed less focused on our facility during the quiet periods. My hope grew stronger with each cycle, and I could see the same cautious optimism spreading among the crew. But during the 4th shutdown cycle, something changed. Rather than drifting away, the Dunkley Osteus began a slow, methodical inspection of our facility's outer structure. It moved from section to section, pausing at junctions and connections. "What's it doing?" I asked Alexis, as we watched the infrared signature move along our facility's outline. "It's learning," she said quietly. "It's testing for weaknesses in a more systematic way." It adapted to our strategy, I realized, the brief hope I'd felt earlier crumbling away. It's intelligent enough to change tactics. When we resumed normal operations after that shutdown, the creature didn't return to its previous attack pattern. Instead, it continued its methodical testing, focusing particularly on the connecting tunnels between modules. I called an emergency meeting with Nick. "We need to prioritize reinforcing the connectors between the command module and living quarters. That's where everyone sleeps, and it's the most vulnerable section." "We've already started," Nick said, "but it'll take at least 12 more hours to complete." "Work faster," I told him. "We may not have that long." That night, I couldn't sleep. I stayed in the command center, monitoring the creature's movements and coordinating with the night shift. Around 2 in the morning, most of the crew had retired to the living quarters, leaving only a skeleton crew manning essential stations. The first warning was a change in the Dunkley Osteus's movement pattern. It began circling faster, its body language shifting from exploratory to predatory. I was about to call Nick when it happened. The impact hit with such force that I was thrown against the console. The entire facility shuddered, metal groaning under stress. Alarms blared as emergency lights flashed red. I grabbed the comm unit. "All hands. Impact at Connector Junction Alpha. This is not a drill." I pulled up the structural integrity display and watched in horror as pressure warnings flashed across the critical section connecting our living quarters to the command module, exactly where all our off-duty crew were sleeping. The Dunkley Osteus had found our weakness. I shouted into my comm unit the moment I saw the pressure warnings flashing red across the display. "Everyone to the command center now. Move!" The impact had sent tremors through the entire facility, and I could feel the metal groaning beneath my feet. The Dunkley Osteus had found our weakness, the connecting tunnel where most of the crew was sleeping. My heart raced as I watched the security feed showing crew members stumbling from their quarters in confusion. "Nick," I called across the command center. "Status report." "That thing just slammed into Junction Alpha," Nick said, his fingers flying across his console. "The outer hull is holding, but I'm seeing stress fractures forming along the seams." Another violent impact rocked the facility, nearly knocking me off my feet. The creature was ramming the tunnel with terrifying force. I grabbed the edge of the console to steady myself. "All personnel, "This is Operations Chief Garrison," I announced over the facility-wide comm. "Emergency protocol is now in effect. All crew to the command center immediately. This is not a drill." I watched the monitors as people poured into the hallways, some still in sleep clothes, making their way toward us. The command center doors slid open as the first group arrived. Alexis, followed by Cole and a dozen others. Their faces showed raw fear. "Seal all access points once everyone's inside," I told Josephine, who nodded and began typing commands into her terminal. The facility shuddered again. A metallic groan echoed through the structure, deeper and more ominous than before. "It's going to tear right through that tunnel," Nick said, looking up from his screen. "Structural integrity is dropping fast." "How many still out there?" I asked, scanning the security feeds. "3 crew members from Engineering Bay 4, Josephine answered, her voice tight with worry. The doors opened again, and Sophia burst in with 2 technicians behind her. "That's everyone," she gasped. "Close all internal bulkheads," I ordered. "Now." The command left my mouth just as the lights flickered and went out for 2 seconds before the emergency systems turned on. The dim red glow of backup lighting illuminated 62 frightened faces. I moved to the viewport at the far wall of the command center, drawn by a scraping sound that seemed to come from directly outside. What I saw made my blood run cold. The Dunkleosteus pressed against the reinforced glass, its massive armored body looming over us. In the dim light from our floodlights, I could see its prehistoric form clearly. The bone plates of its skull scraped against our hull. "It's testing us," Alexis whispered, appearing at my side. "Learning our weaknesses." The awful sound of bone against metal resonated through the entire command center. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. Everyone tensed at once. Some covered their ears, others stared with wide eyes at the viewport. "Nick," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "what's our hull integrity at right now?" 62% and dropping, he replied. "If it finds the right spot to hit us." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I watched, unable to look away, as the creature backed up slightly in the water. Its massive jaw began to open, revealing rows of sharp bone plates that had evolved specifically to shear through the hardest materials on the ancient seabed. "It's going to bite through," I said, the reality of our situation hitting me full force. And then, like a flash of lightning, I remembered something. A detail from months ago during construction that had seemed insignificant at the time. Nick had been explaining the ballast system during my initial tour, pointing out various emergency features. "Nick," I said, turning away from the viewport. "The emergency discharge port for the mining slurry. Where's the control for it?" He looked confused for a moment. Then his eyes lit up with understanding. "Over there," he said, pointing to a control panel near the environmental systems. "But why would you?" I pushed past crew members to reach the panel. Our ballast tanks held a mixture of seawater and metallic mud from our mining operation. We usually dumped it gradually through filtered ports, but there was an emergency system to clear the tanks quickly if needed. This system might be our only weapon. I reached the control panel and began accessing the ballast system. The interface showed our tanks were nearly at capacity. We hadn't done a routine discharge in over 24 hours because of the crisis. "What are you doing?" Alexis asked, rushing to my side. "Something that might save us," I told her, fingers working to override the safety protocols. "Those tanks are full of mining waste, all that metallic sediment we've been collecting. Normally, we filter it and release it slowly to avoid contaminating the ecosystem." "And under these circumstances," she asked, "we're going to give that thing a taste of what we've been digging up." Through the viewport, I saw the Dunkleosteus back up, making room for an attack. Its jaw opened wider, the bony plates extending fully. Those plates were built to crush the hardest shells and bones. Our reinforced steel would offer little resistance. "Everyone brace yourselves," I shouted as I finished the final override. The emergency discharge controls lit up green on my screen. Nick appeared at my shoulder, understanding spreading across his face. "The nearest port is just 10 feet from where that thing is positioning itself," he said, pointing to a diagram on the screen. "If you time it right." "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I said. On the monitor, I watched the Dunkleosteus pull back, its entire body tensing like a coiled spring. The creature's primitive yet perfect hunting form made one final adjustment, lining up for maximum impact. Its mouth gaped wide, revealing the vulnerable tissue inside, the one part of its body not protected by armor plates. My finger hovered over the activation button. Timing would be everything. "Now," Nick yelled as the creature lunged forward. I slammed my palm down on the control, activating the emergency discharge port. The entire facility shuddered as thousands of gallons of pressurized slurry blasted outward through the external port. On the monitors, we watched the high-pressure jet of abrasive, metallic-laced mud shoot directly into the Dunkleosteus's open mouth. The creature had been milliseconds away from clamping its jaws on our hull when the dark cloud hit it. The force of the discharge caught it mid-attack, sending the slurry straight into its gills and unprotected mouth cavity. The Dunkleosteus twisted away, its body convulsing as the mixture filled its respiratory system. Its movements turned frantic, no longer the calculated attacks of a hunter, but the desperate thrashing of a creature in distress. "It's working," Alexis whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. The slurry continued to pump out, enveloping the creature in a thick cloud of metallic mud. Through the murk, we could see the Dunkleosteus twisting and rolling, trying to clear its breathing apparatus of the foreign substance. Each impact against our hull sent tremors through the command center, but these weren't attacks anymore. They were the uncontrolled spasms of a predator that had suddenly become prey. "Hull integrity?" I called out, not taking my eyes off the viewport. "Holding at 58%, Nick answered. "The impacts are getting weaker." The ballast tanks emptied, the pressure gauge dropping to 0 as the last of the slurry dispersed into the water around our facility. For several tense minutes, we all stood in silence, watching as the Dunkleosteus continued its violent struggle just outside our viewport. Then, with one final powerful lash of its tail, the creature turned and retreated into the darkness beyond our lights, leaving nothing but swirling clouds of sediment in its wake. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Around me, the command center remained silent, 62 pairs of eyes fixed on the murky water where our attacker had disappeared. "Damage report," I finally said, turning to Nick. He looked up from his console, his face a mixture of relief and concern. "Hull integrity at 68%. We're holding, but if that thing comes back for another round..." He didn't need to finish the thought. We all knew another attack would be catastrophic. I watched as the creature convulsed. The metallic slurry flooded its respiratory system, causing its armored body to twist in pain. Each movement of the Dunkleosteus sent tremors through our habitat. It slammed against our walls with force, making the entire structure groan under stress. I grabbed the edge of the nearby console, my knuckles turning white as our facility shook. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across the command center, reflecting off the faces of my crew. Their wide eyes and rigid postures told me everything I needed to know about their fear. My own heart was pounding as I kept my focus on the viewport, watching as the armored fish thrashed against our fragile home. "Hold on," I called out as another impact rocked us sideways. The creature's massive jaw opened and closed, trying to expel the mining waste we'd forced into its system. Each time it struck our habitat, I felt the floor shift beneath me. Through the viewport, I saw its eyes, ancient yet filled with rage or confusion. Then, with one final violent thrust of its armored body, the Dunkleosteus turned away from us. I kept my grip on the console, watching through the viewport as the enormous beast retreated into the murky darkness, leaving behind swirling clouds of sediment and waste. The water outside our habitat transformed into a brown haze, particles catching the light from our external floods. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. A chorus of shaky affirmations came back to me. "Nick, give me a damage assessment," I said immediately, turning to face my chief engineer. Nick's fingers flew across his console, his face illuminated by the blue glow of his screen against the red emergency lighting. "Hull integrity at 68%, he reported, looking up at me. "We're holding, but another attack would be catastrophic. Any more stress on the outer shell and we'd have catastrophic decompression." I nodded, processing the information. "Josephine, status of internal systems?" "Life support is stable," she answered from her station. "Emergency power functioning at 80% capacity. Internal pressure holding steady." "All right," I said, addressing the entire command center. "I want a full inspection of every section. We need to know exactly where our vulnerabilities are." For the next several hours, we worked methodically to assess our situation. The crew moved with purpose, despite their exhaustion, checking structural integrity, reviewing system functionality, and reinforcing what weak points we could identify. By morning, we had a clearer picture of our circumstances. The attack had compromised several key structural points, but we weren't in immediate danger. Still, I ordered continuous monitoring of all external cameras and sensors. The Dunkleosteus might return, and we needed to be ready. The next 3 days were filled with anxiety. I kept the team alert, setting up a rotation for rest while ensuring we always watched the perimeter. Every unusual sound or vibration in the floor heightened the crew's tension. I barely slept, my mind racing through contingency plans. On the morning of the third day, I was reviewing structural reports with Nick when Josephine's voice broke through on the comm. "August, I've got something," she said, a hint of excitement breaking through her professional tone. I hurried to the communication station, where Josephine sat with her headset pressed against one ear. "Surface communications have been restored," she said, looking up at me. "The relay buoy must have reactivated, or they sent down a replacement. Signals weak but stable." Relief washed over me, but I didn't let it slow me down. "Patch me through immediately," I instructed. I wasted no time requesting an emergency evacuation submersible, explaining our situation in clear, urgent terms to the surface team. When Director Sammy Myers joined the call, his response was predictably focused on the company's bottom line. "An emergency evacuation for the entire facility staff?" Myers questioned, his voice tinny through the comm system. "August, the cost of that operation would be astronomical. Are you certain this situation warrants such measures?" "With all due respect, Director," I replied, keeping my voice even despite my frustration. "We've been attacked by an unknown marine predator with the ability to breach our structural integrity. Our hull is already compromised. This isn't about cost. It's about the lives of 62 crew members." "I need more than just your word on this," Myers said. "The board will require evidence before authorizing such an operation." "Stand by for data transmission," I told him, nodding to Josephine. We compiled the footage of the Dunkleosteus attacks, focusing on the most recent incident that showed the creature's power and intelligence. I included Nick's structural analysis and Alexis's preliminary findings on the creature itself. Within an hour of sending the footage, Myers contacted us again. "Evacuation approved," he stated without preamble. Submersible launch in 12 hours. ETA to your location 48 hours after launch. After ending the transmission, I gathered the senior staff to share the news and develop our plan for the waiting period. The relief in the room was palpable, but I reminded everyone that we weren't safe yet. 2 more days in these conditions, I said. We need to make sure we're still here when that sub arrives. I spent much of the next day working alongside Nick to reinforce the most vulnerable sections of the facility. We redirected power from non-essential systems to strengthen our defensive capabilities and reinforce the structural integrity fields around critical junctions. You think it'll come back? Nick asked, as we finished installing additional support struts in Junction Beta. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances. Later, I found Alexis in the research lab, frantically organizing data drives and specimen containers. Need a hand? I asked, stepping into the lab. She looked up, her hair disheveled from running her hands through it. Yes, please. I'm trying to make sure we don't lose any of this data. It's unprecedented, August. A living fossil that shouldn't exist. I helped her secure her research materials, carefully labeling containers and backing up digital files onto portable drives. As we worked, I could see the scientist in her battling with the human, excited by the discovery but shaken by our encounter. This will change everything we know about deep-sea ecosystems, she said, carefully sealing a sample container. Evolutionary biology, marine adaptation, extinction events. All of it will need to be reconsidered. If we make it back to the surface with this data, I added, not as a pessimist, but as a realist. She nodded, understanding my meaning. The data's ready for transport, triple backed up and secured. Good, I said. Get some rest. We've got a long 48 hours ahead of us. As I helped her finish packing the last of her equipment, I thought about what we had discovered. A living, prehistoric creature that showed intelligence and adaptability. This find could change marine biology forever, assuming we live to share it. That night I made one final round of the facility, checking on each section and speaking with crew members. The atmosphere had shifted from desperate fear to cautious hope. The evacuation submersible was on its way. We just needed to hold out a little longer.